Good evening, everyone, and welcome to today's program at the NUS Baba House. I'm Danielle, Assistant Manager from the Outreach team here. And this evening, we are pleased to have a conversation with artist photographer Chris Yap about his artwork as part of the longer-running Grounded Conversation series at NUS Museum, with independent curator Zulfadhli Hilmi as interlocutor. Grounded Conversations is a series that brings together practitioners from the contemporary art world to explore artistic productions and their contexts, such as how art practitioners have begun to adopt comprehensive paradigms in their methods associated with environs and formal interests, and negotiated through research and rooted commitment. Today, we have Chris Yap, who is a noted artist, both technically and academically. He explores many different genres of art, to get to learn different forms of storytelling, believing more in the process than in the final product of it. He has worked on finger bowls and hankies, which exhibited at the Baba House in 2009, as well as works in the past couple of years in the currently showing Glossaries of the Straits Chinese Homemaking exhibition. So if you haven't already, you can watch a short introductory video or interview with him and one of his works on our Facebook page after this talk. Zulfadhli Hilmi is a curator and researcher whose interests lie in contemporary issues of art in the peripheries, contemporary museological practices, and technologies. Previously, Hilmi has co-curated 2219, Futures Imagined, and Floating Utopias at Art Science Museum, Recollect, the Making of Our Art Collection in 2018, Lim Cheng Ho, Painting Singapore in 2018, and was also tasked to research on Singapore's pioneering Malay artists and Islamic aesthetics in Southeast Asia at National Gallery Singapore. Hilmi independently curated Reforming Patani as part of Bangkok Biennale 2018, which received a notable review on the front page of Bangkok Post and of Place and Paradox at NUS Museum. So we're starting off this evening with a short clip that will be displayed, contributed by the Gunung Sayang Association to set the tone for this evening's conversation as we explore the significance of the stage in Peranakan culture, and in particular, its role as a theme in inspiring some of the artworks that Chris has done for the NUS Baba House.
Beranak-anak perempuan tak guna set, tak boleh pakai ilmu jantan punya set tau. Bukan macamnya dia punya orang banyak punya. Dia tahu set. Kuat ada 2 anak jantan. Tengok ayu. Walaupun homnya tau. Wah ala ada jantan. Dia lalu jodoh homnya lah, tak homnya lah. Bahok bila ni sampai?
Ya baru sampai saya. Orang cuti pasal apa?
Tak adalah anak jantan anak perempuan. Ini 2 orang ni bukan homnya set. Bukan macam gua.
Baba Chris pun ada.
So that was a clip that kind of showed a bit about the hustle and bustle and perhaps a bit of the theatricality that happens within the Peranakan community. And that could have been one of the motivations, as you have mentioned, in how you decided to conceptualize one of your artworks in particular. So today we'll be focusing on various different artworks that he has done. But we will like to start off with cross-dressing and culture, which I think directly is related to this video that you've just shared with us.
Diving straight into the work that's here now at the museum.
Yes.
So this work my original work of finger bowls and hankies is a series of 5 pictures, a luggage, and then a light fixture, costumes, and even like a DVD and all that. Is all meant to be unpacked over time, artists, myself, whoever, you pick up the thing and you decide to unpack it. And this was unpacking of one of the characters in that whole big work. It's an actor who is the illegitimate son of the king of Peranakan, who cross-dresses as a woman to gain entry into the kingdom and then to steal the riches within the kingdom. And my setup is for the actor that plays that character. So it's a male playing a female. That came about because I wanted to kind of discuss this gender of the culture. When we talk about Peranakan, we talk about things in Peranakan. We often talk about the feminine things, like the kamjeng, the food, the sarang kebaya, and all that. So it's kind of a way for me to also think about this, how gender plays into this culture. But we also have to think about, like, well, obviously they have husbands and all that. And then back in the old days where women are not allowed to leave their homes, it was actually the guys who actually goes out and then buy the things and give it to the women. Or, if the woman were to advise the men, say, maybe find something blue or green or whatever, and then that's made into a bowl, and then that becomes, what we call the Peranakan culture. So it's the culture is kind of a bit of a borrowed of everything. So that's kind of like the jumping point from the character from that first work 12 years ago. Yeah.
I think when you mentioned the part about how it's gender, but also using that as a jumping off point, I think it was quite interesting to see how you combine different elements and different items in your installation to then give the audience or the viewer who has not seen it before different clues to try and piece together a bigger narrative of what was going on in the artwork.
Yeah. So thanks for bringing it out. So, so it's the dressing table of the actor that plays the character, and I wanted the character to play not a drag queen, but someone who is actually a man who plays a woman. So it's not overly made up. It's just kind of like, I just want to look kind of woman, and I have long hair. The costume is also designed in such a way that I also wanted to kind of also move the culture forward. Like, what my term is future Peranakan, where what is the future of Peranakans, rather than Peranakan, like the culture is 100 years old and it's never changed in 100 years. So what do we do moving forward? That was something that I also wanted to look at. And on the dressing table, you will see, of course, the makeup and all that. The makeup, I wanted to give it a sense of modern. So I spoke to a lot of actors, actresses. I said, okay, so what do you use, for your makeup and why and all that. And so I found like a lot of it is like Korean now is very common and popular. And then like even the lenses that they wear is the one that makes the iris bigger. And there's also like, the waste paper basket gives you clues as to what he ate, what he was using, the makeup that he was using. And then I think most importantly is the two letters there, where one he writes to his daughter who he loves very much, and one to his wife who is obviously Japanese. So also I wanted to put in the idea of like, so people think that Peranakan is kind of like mixed blood, but now in this case, now he's Singaporean, he married a Japanese. Then now what, is the kid now Peranakan, and what is this? So he's obviously very much into this, the culture, because he's been performing with the troupe for quite a while now, and he's actually now in Australia, but he brings with him the culture, and he's also welcomed by the culture of the people, his friends and family who's there, like the rice wine and stuff like that. So many, many clues. So when you see it, it's kind of like walking into someone's makeup table. I mean, I have people who came and said like, maybe you should put the rubbish bin somewhere else, and then not realizing the rubbish bin is actually part of the work, or the slippers, maybe we should straighten it up. And it's just meant to look like he just walked out, and he just went on stage. So the idea of that slice of life, which I really quite like, is kind of like a reference to like this, photography, this snap of a moment also. So there's always that kind of a tension where an audience comes in, he or she discovers the work more, and then he or she wants to read more stories coming out from the work as you look through it, and you see the drawings in the mirrors, and you see like, why is that a shaving cream? And then you see mascara, and you say, oh, this thing looks kind of dirty. It looks non-pristine. It doesn't quite look like art. It really looks like just a daily life. And that's what I wanted to bring across to an audience, to kind of, and it's also for myself to challenge myself to say, I want to create this, I want to go into fashion, but not fashion in, what's the season for, spring, summer and all that, none of those, but it's more like fashion in the sense of, if I'm inspired to do something, with clothes, then what do I want to do with? And this itself, which I will talk about a bit later, is also kind of something I wanted to bring across. And the idea of process, for me, the final artwork is never what is important to me. It's always the process. It's the process where I learn, and if the process is interesting enough, I will just keep going at it. You know, it just makes me want to create more and more because the process is interesting. I just keep learning, and obviously the more you learn, the more you realize you don't know, and therefore you just want to keep learning. So for me, that keeps me kind of energized to do work. So yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I do have a question going back to the issue of gender. Obviously, when you were creating this work, when you wanted to deal with the issue of gender, it was quite a measured one. You gave the clarifications that you wanted to be precise and not have one person who's performing a drag, for example. But the different persona this actor is taking on is in a way quite distinct and separate, where you have here a straight male figure who's married and then performing as a male actor who is cross-dressing. So it's a multi-layered approach, but one that is quite you restrict the personality solely into different compartments, I would say. So my question is, why do this when easily the lines could have easily been blurred? And is it one that it is of history, or is it a point that you are trying to make across? If you can clarify that.
Oh, I mean, it's like back in the old days, it started with Chinese theater where women are not allowed on stage. So if there's any female characters, it's usually played by a male who then cross-dresses as a female. It's almost like a drag queen kind of performance, except in Chinese style. So I think the Peranakan theater kind of borrowed from that. And then when it started performing, there was no females allowed, and it was really just male cross-dressing as females and all that. And I wanted to be very clear that it's not a drag show where you have like glitter and all that. I really wanted it to be very household-based. Like it's a very natural thing. That you go in and you just slap on your makeup, with a little bit of lipstick, with some mascara or whatever it is, just a little bit. Like you look at the person, okay, kind of a manly woman, that's fine also, because then that's kind of a natural process, a natural looking thing that goes into the character. Because the illegitimate son, the character, has never been a female before, so he wouldn't, as a person, as a character, knows how to be a female. So he is like learning as he goes along in the household to try and pick up. And then the idea that he wants to be a female so that he can take the riches of Peranakan is very telling. I wanted to put that in because I wanted people to realize that, hey, there's a gender in the value of Peranakan culture. So we need to realize that is rather unbalanced. It's kind of like, the opposite of feminism. So like the males, when you ask like, so what do male Peranakans wear? And then they will always say, oh, those chin coat kind of thing. There's like, oh, that's just Chinese costume. But, is there something specific to the Peranakan males? I mean, now we have like the batik shirts and all that. But before, it's really just business wear, long sleeve shirt, white shirt, business pants. And then if you are in a cultural situation, then you just wear your Chinese Qingcao, that kind of costumes. And then that became kind of like, to me, it's kind of like not Peranakan, but it's rather just a Chinese kind of a costume. So it becomes non-descriptive of the male Peranakans. So I wanted to bring in the idea that it's the males who goes out and brings in all these different cultures from all over the world to make into what we call is a melt of culture, Peranakan. Yeah.
Okay, then goes to the next question. As you know, in popular representations of the Peranakan, it's always seen as, the hybrid culture, like one that should be celebrated and venerated. And that comes with the idea of nostalgia, the glitz, the glamour of the whole work. But, upon the first encounter of these works, like you mentioned, one, it is quite an intimate space. It's a dressing table. So it's something that, you don't often see for a stage, right? And it's one that's quite intimate for the actor and the cast. So in your perspective, right, this celebration and the veneration of Peranakan culture, like, is there something that you want to change of how people receive it? Growing up in a Peranakan household, you mentioned to me in our private conversations that when we see this popular representation, it tends to represent the more affluent side of the Peranakans. But for the common people like you and me, it's something that might be relatable, might be something that we're proud of, but it's also kind of like a first encounter for any of us. So, from your perspective, like how should one consume or in a way absorb and understand the culture? And what do you intend to change from it?
In that first series of work, I actually kind of mentioned this. So like this part of the world is mainly populated by the Australasians, which is south of China. And it's quite obvious that the people then was always very welcoming of cultures from overseas. Wherever foreigners that come is always welcome. And therefore foreigners feel very welcome to kind of stay and say, oh, look, this is a very rich culture. Let's try and work with this. And then that kind of mixing, to me, is what makes Peranakans, where it's very welcoming and obviously very happy group of people and who wants to share. So I think that spirit of it is more important than the actual material of it, where we need to move on and says like, look, we Peranakans is not something from 90 years or 100 years ago. All the things are all antiques and it's got this value, it's got this, that, and all that. But I think we need to kind of focus on what makes Peranakans. And I think as artists, I mean, everyone is an artist. And I feel in particular, Peranakans, because I think their life is often filled with drama and it's often happy drama. I mean, based on my observations of different Peranakan families, the idea of creating something, I think, is very important. And I love it as an artist. Of course, I love it. I said, oh, yes, let's create something. But I was just posting this on Facebook. I was like, okay, finally, I made a future Peranakan shirt. And then people were just commenting, saying, no, this is not Peranakan. Peranakan has got this phoenix, it's got this, that kind of stuff. And it was very funny because I was like, oh, well, look at this. Am I designing for that generation or am I designing for the future of Peranakan? So once you have that idea that, oh, wait, we need to look forward, you kind of realize that Peranakan is stuck there. And recently I was like advising two young kids who's working with Alvin Tan on a work, which is kind of like, okay, I'm not sure if I'm supposed to say this, but based on Peranakans. And yeah, so everyone is trying to find what this Peranakans is, this thing about Peranakan. And I always say start with the drama. Once you start with the drama, you start with the happiness, you get a long way, into how the culture is like. And you start to mix more. I think the idea of mixing, I think, is very interesting because you can only mix when you're an open person and when you are able to accept and you're able to also give at the same time. So yeah, so that's how I think everyone should kind of do that and just be able to create a kind of a culture. It might not be called Peranakan, but now we call it Peranakan, so why not? So it's, yeah, I think it's a good thing to kind of have.
I think it's quite interesting how you mentioned like, how do you then look at the culture today? Because in your introductory interview, you also talking about how do we see this cosmopolitanism that you portray here as Peranakan? Because oftentimes you would see that, today we just take for granted, like, everything is very transnational anyway. So how is this very historical term being applied and how it can then be reinterpreted in a sense for your artwork?
Yeah, so I answered it already.
Yeah.
So I mean, like, I look at it also like, because the actor, because he's being influenced by the culture that as he's performing it, right? So he finds a piece of lace, which is not the Peranakan type of lace, and he finds a piece of sarong. He decides to combine the two together and make a dress for the wife. And then what do you call that? It's obviously not called sarong kebaya, but now it could be called something else. It's something new. And that's also one of the reasons why I wanted to enter this by designing costumes, in a sense of like, I'm inspired by this, let's do something. It doesn't have to look like something from the past. It can be inspired and therefore look something completely different. And yeah, so everyone needs to just keep an open mind and say, okay, yeah, actually, why not? And then from there we explore more, like the structure of the biggest costume which I made. If the actor was kind of like angry, it looks like the blue pea flower, and the idea of that fabric being dyed to the color of the dried blue pea flower as opposed to the actual blue pea flower took a long time just to get to, because I think the inspiration came from the food rather than the actual plant itself. So it was a decision I have to make so that it makes more sense when you talk about it. When the story of this becomes evident, you kind of say, oh, it's actually the dried flower color and not the fresh flower color. Yeah. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting point of view, which I think should be elaborated on, because when we talk about the whole idea of commercialization and all that, right? So people are quick, and everyone knows. I mean, the cat's out of the bag. Everyone knows that the moment you put Peranakan something, immediately the extrinsic value of
Nasi lemak, right?
the product suddenly becomes so
Yes.
important, and you can charge $15-18 for it, right? So we have these conversations, but I think it's also one that's coming out of fear, in a way, because like you and me, we are born in a generation where it's even more transnational now as compared to slightly more insular. I wouldn't say that it's insular, but it's slightly more insular in that sense of the past.
Not as fast.
So yeah, maybe not as fast, the transmission of the communications and culture. But then the question becomes this: if you've never grown up in a Peranakan household, I want to use the word household here because it's one that in a way represents the idea of growing up and living into that culture. If it's one that you've never grown up with, should you be afraid of this? Because if you never experienced it and internalize the whole thing, then even your own culture becomes a foreign thing. Because of that, then the whole idea of the veneration might be a false pretense, in that sense. So when you talked about, when we want to absorb or understand culture itself, we should absorb, and one of the fastest thing to absorb is through the drama, right? Drama in a way describes daily life in a more
happy way. It makes news easier to digest, and it's more humorous, and it's easy to remember because it's like haha, that you remember it.
Yeah, precisely. And when that communication becomes becomes more common, then the whole idea of veneration becomes one that is off from the material things like what you emphasize on. And that's a point that I think should, because like you mentioned, and the way you represent the Peranakan culture in your work, it's a living tradition.
Most certainly, yes.
Yeah, like the makeup items, or even right down to the daily household, like the biscuit or the biscuit tin or whatsoever. Then those things become a living culture alongside.
Correct. It's not always the Peranakan dishes and the particular way of doing this. It's not that, because life is obviously a lot bigger than that, right? And like when I first researched this and I found out that my mom's side, right, they like all the things they do, the food they cook and all that, and I would say like, wait a minute, I think they're kind of Peranakan if you ask me, and very good Peranakans at that. But they say no, they'll say no, I'm Teochew, I'm not Peranakan. So even that in itself is, to me, is like, okay, there's a bit of a difference there. But I think like just to take life with a pinch of salt and a spotlight, I think life becomes more fun, and then you are able to see things in a different perspective, and usually more positive and more open instead of fear. Because if you're pretending to like something, you might eventually just learn to like it, as opposed to like, I'm like seriously afraid. And I say, okay, I'm pretending to be afraid. Maybe you end up not being afraid. The idea of managing yourself around culture becomes less daunting when you see it as a performance. I think if that's the way to put it. Yeah.
I think when you refer to culture as looking at it through performance, I think going back to other works that you've done outside of this installation of cross-dressing and culture, I think interesting connection that this work has in with previous ones is the connection of the Little Nyonya, which is also a different performance in its own right. But it's something that you seem very interested in because I think you might want to elaborate on the language and the wording on the wall, as well as perhaps Suitcase from 2009.
Yes.
Which, yeah.
So if you just kind of look here behind Hilmi, there's kind of like a suitcase thingy. So that's also part of my work. So it's a very old like traveling suitcase with cut mirror pieces of the icons of Peranakans and peonies, bats, stuff like that. Okay, so it's just like shiny. But if you open it out, there's actually a DVD of the Little Noya, the TV show that was very popular like 12 years ago on. And all the Peranakans hated it because they said, we don't speak Chinese. And like, yes, I kind of agree, but I also want to poke fun at the culture again because you know what? Why not laugh, right? So in the new work Against the Wall, I actually had my lovely friend Fred from Gunung Sayang to kind of translate some lines into dramatic Peranakan theatre text. So this is what I said. You translate this line for me. I give you the Chinese, okay? And then I give you the English in case you don't understand the Chinese, and the English also. Then you translate for me because he also directs and writes plays. So I said like, okay, and that's something that you would say on stage, something really drama. And then he gave those lines and he translated, and then I put it on the wall. So it's kind of like to kind of remind you that this is a stage, and then those are the lines that's happening on stage as you are like here reading this letter or looking at this dressing table. It's actually we're actually behind stage, so to speak. But it's like interesting to kind of like say that how the language suddenly becomes the definition of the culture. I always thought it was like Bahasa Indonesian or some sort because that's what my mom certainly spoke, right? But then I realized that it's actually a mismatch also of different languages. Again, very fun. I think that's the future of languages anyway, Singlish included. Don't score me in your comments, okay? Because that's what I personally think. But yeah, because I think language has to grow and language is not something that's dead. I mean, we have Queen's English, now we have like what? YouTube English, you know, whatever that is. And it's interesting to see how over generations, our language will evolve. And we should not try and stop it and say, okay, we should only speak Queen's English or Beijing Zhongwen, that kind of stuff. Why? You know, there's really no need to be, because this is life, this is evolution. It's meant to change, it's meant to be better in the future. So yeah, so again, that openness to accept change and to be able to evolve with life, I think makes life easier, it's less stressful when you're not fighting it, you know? Yeah.
So,
Did I just stop to you?
Oh, no, you didn't. Yeah, I was just thinking about how there's like a very interesting meandering trajectory between like your past works and your present ones. And yeah, one of the threads is that of the Little Nyonya, which is present in this exhibition right now, and especially with the two artworks that are just quite nearby each other. But I was also thinking about the other recent work that you did for the Glossaries exhibition, which is that of cups and kueh, which also is somewhat related to that, but then brings in the idea of material culture now, and in particular, a very close connection with a neighbor of ours who is, you know, Guan Antiques. So just wanted to kind of hear about what your interest in dealing with, you know, the physical material culture and featuring various works.
I mean, my interest is not really the material itself. My interest is more the stories that comes with it. So when I interviewed Guan, who's the owner, Chun, who is the owner of Guan Antiques, I wanted to also, through the pictures, kind of show that, you know, there's a buyer, a seller, and there's also a collector with, you know, vast history of knowledge, you know, behind him, and then learning that, oh, this is Peranakan, oh, this is worth $80, oh, this is how much, you know, that kind of. And the stories for me is a lot more interesting. And then it just happens to be a plate, then I'll love the plate and all, because then the plate carries the story, right? So yeah, so I mean, like for me, it's is more than the material. It's what the material holds in terms of the stories. Yeah, because that will empower us to know that, you know what, these stories can then now be a part of another dramatic conversation somewhere, and then something, the spirit of our ancestors can then be brought forward and learned, that say, oh, this is what they used to deal with, and that's what they had to deal with, because then we had huge water leakage, whatever it is, that kind of the stories that comes with it. I think it's a lot more, it gives a sense of our past without without diluting it to become just a plate or bowl or cup. It's a lot more than that. Yeah. So that interview was a really, I really like the idea of the interview, that I just thought, and then found out that, I also know his son, who's, also another interest group. So then you connect with life again through other stories, which is fabulous.
And how then, I guess, does that translate to the format of the 6 posters that you are pasting one on top of the other?
Oh, so like it's a form of photography that, usually we think of photography as one picture, you post, you frame it, you put it up there, or you just stick the print up, and then that's a photo exhibition. And then especially in the museum, how are we supposed to then break that pigeonhole of how photography should be presented? And I wanted kind of like, my interest also is in filmmaking. I also wanted to kind of like say, then how do we, instead of having a split second, to have many split seconds in this show? So and it was very nice to be able to speak to Ahmad about this. And then it says that you can show several, like one over the other, because I actually wanted to, the idea of like sticking is something that I was thinking about with another friend of mine. Like we do posters, then we stick, and then until it becomes like a thick thing. I said, oh, it'd be fantastic if you can show it over time, like how this happens. So like every 3 or 6 months, we're going to like tear it out and then stick a new. So if you come every 3 or 6 months, you will see a different picture being posted there. And it's just really the story of what happens between Achun and a client or a collector or buyer, things like that. So then the story will unfold, because you look around it and you see, wow, this should be quite expensive, then that should be how much, and what is this, then how come they're putting the kueh and the tea in like really expensive antique? And then like it's very funny, because I just went there, I said, I go and borrow your plate and your cup, okay, I'm going to pour tea and eat oily food. Okay, can 没问题, because it was originally meant to be used and not just collected and put behind glass, and made valuable. It's not, that's not, he understands it as the life of an object. Yeah. Excuse me.
So I think what intrigues me is also in these 2 pieces that you've done more recently, that you mentioned earlier on that you do more of photography, but in these 2 cases, you're trying to kind of twist that idea of that still image into 2 very, perhaps you can debate with me on this, 2 pretty different layouts. One, that of very 3-dimensional installation, whereas the other one is still 2-dimensional, but has an element of time. But you can also argue that the installation itself has some semblance of like process as well, like over time. So if there's anything you want to talk about that, or if Hilmi, you have any ideas about installation.
My first discipline was actually music, and then painting, and then photography, and then theater, and then writing and stuff like that. I realized that I'm a person who likes to tell stories. So like different stories require different medium to be told. And therefore, if this medium doesn't work, I have to find another medium that works. Like when I used to lecture at ADM, I would tell, in fact, when I lecture around Asia, I would always say like, if photography is not the medium that tells your story best, then do something else. Then why are you doing photography if that's not the best medium to tell your story? So it's always about, how best to share your story with an audience. Yeah.
Now we'll move on towards the idea of the scene and the stage, because it's clearly being teased out in both your works. I saw the video when you talked about the
Finger bowls and
of finger bowls and hankies.
hankies.
You wanted to bring in your practice in theatre out very much. So and I mean with regards to the dressing table, it's there. So before moving on to setting the scene here, talk through the process of your art making in a way. I think the most important question for me, I mean this is along the lines of my interest as well. Like when you are creating the work, what do you see yourself as?
The simple answer is storyteller. The process is, okay, so for that first series of work 12 years ago, I when I was approached to do this, I was like, I'm not Peranakan, so why should I do this? And the response was, precisely because you're not, so we want your perspective on what the culture can be. Maybe give something fresh, right? Which I said, oh yeah, that's quite true. Now remember, I was 12 years younger, huh? So I don't have this kind of like, I know what I'm doing. And then my research was like a whole folder full of so much information. And I was talking to a lot of friends and they all said like, pick up something and just focus on that and then expound on that, which is very common practice for a lot of artists, right? They focus on something and then they expound on that. But Chris being Chris, you know, so it's like so much things, right? Then how I want to say everything as much as I can. And then I always believe that my now is always informed by my past. So I said, okay, so what have I done in the past that will be able to help me bring this forward? And I remembered that I was doing something for Wild Rice, you know, Asian boys. And I was like, oh, theater, maybe, you know, this is something that I am interested, you know, theater is something that I always like to be in. So maybe that's the past I need to kind of like go into and see how I can do this. And almost immediately, the whole story was in my mind already. I just had this whole rough vistas of how the scene should be. And then I was like, I can't do that big performance here on the third floor of Baba House. That's not going to happen. Then, of course, think photography, right? I said, okay, I'll create like different scenes. And then within the scene, I will tell my story again, but differently. Because with photography, it's a bit different. You place everything important in that one frame. And then people kind of decipher it out, and then the next frame, and then the next frame. And then it was split into male on one side and female on one side, with the cross-dressing illegitimate son appearing twice because he's both male and female, right? And it's quite, the process actually is very interesting, but I realized that once everything is in place, life takes over, serendipity happens. You know, within 2 weeks, I finished the whole shoot. And this shoot is not a simple kind of shoot, it's really massive production kind of a shoot. And in 2 weeks, and my models were all very, exactly what the characters were. Like the king was the president of the Peranakan society with the wife, therefore the queen, and the prince is the son. And then the two princesses are descendants of Tan Tock Seng. And then we have a chef who's also an actual chef in real life. And then his daughter looks like my friend who's from Taiwan. Then I was talking about like Australasia, the population that comes down and populated here. When she moves here with the daughter, then what happens? And they look alike. And then the illegitimate son and grandson also look alike. And it was just kind of like everything just fell into place really nicely. And same for this as well. So I was like kind of struggling to produce this work because I'm not well versed in fashion. I'm not well versed in creating a set, so to speak. But once I got everything and then it's put in, the mirror has a very long story, which you can read about later. And then, and it's very interesting how everything kind of fell into place, how the mirror came to me, how the makeup came to me. And, you know, maybe it's my friends, when they know what I was doing, they just say, oh, you want this, you want this, nah, things. And then things just come together. The makeup table was found like within 5 minutes of stepping into the shop. It was one of a kind, it's beautiful. And even the clothes hanger, the European Western kind of clothes hanger thingy was also I found along the way. And because I'm a very process-based kind of an artist, the idea of the process enabling me and refreshing me every time I think about it, it helps also. So when I look at something, it could be something I thought about 2 weeks ago, and then now it's right in front of me. So on and so forth. So this whole, how life becomes a part of this art, I think is very real for me. The process for me is very, very real. That's how it came about. it's never too purposeful, like, oh, that's the end and that's what I'm doing. So yeah, so when people commission me, I always kind of like get a bit stuck because they always want to know, so what am I paying for? Like, but look, I need the process. What do you want? I need the process, then I can tell you. So for the few people who commission me, thank you very much, because you have to trust me enough to okay, here's the money, just do what you need to do. And yeah, it's always been a great experience, and I don't think I've disappointed anyone. So yeah.
I'm privileged enough to be able to view the work, especially with the whole idea of the safe distancing and the Baba
1 meter
House
away,
not being
yeah.
fully open, right? So we've heard a lot of in a way the motivations or your ideas of creating the work in a sense. So the works comes to life with your voice, but maybe I'll give my perspective as well.
Please,
So,
yes.
So this is my first encounter. When I see the dressing table, I'm talking about of cross dressing and culture here. Actors cut.
Okay.
The bracket, yeah. So the first encounter, the first thing I saw was the rope. It was in a way there were very sharp line that describes the masculinity of the object itself. It's in a very stoic appearance, but that the idea of flowing layers, I would say,
Yeah.
and the describing of how it morphs into the blue pea, butterfly pea.
Both butterfly
know-
rupee.
Sorry, yeah, came into it, and it's a very fluid transition there, and even with the juxtaposition between the female's makeup and the men's shaving apparatus, right? It's in a way like if you missed it, you missed it, and it felt fluid for me, even right down to the stanzas or the artist lines that you talked about on your wall, right? So, we talk much about your practice as a photographer as well as
Musician,
as a
painter.
theater practitioner, right? But I want to focus down to your role as a musician here, because you talk about it being a process based, and you are very much informed by the past as well as the living right now. And when we talk about fluidity and serendipity in that sense, is it something that you consciously are aware of? Because or maybe it's in the subconscious, and how you arrange these things. I mean, even with the finger bowls and hankies also, that idea that you talked about the bowl, being of very high value, but it's still a living culture here. That the idea of fluidity is strong there as well.
Yes,
So
because
is it something that's conscious?
Well, it was not conscious to start with, but it became more conscious because like every time it happens, it just brings so much joy. You're doing something right when just life is just giving it to you. This is it, and that's that. And it's like famous photographers, right? I mean, photographers are good because life gives them images that is great enough to be captured only by them. And it's not because they created this mountain that climb out that, it's life giving that to them. So everyone goes through the same vista, but not everyone captures the same thing. So when life chooses you to give it to you, there's really immense joy in being able to receive this gift. It's wow, beginning to sound so spiritual, but macam, you understand lah. So it's not a spiritual thing. It can be, but I think because having gone through it so many times in my creative life, I quite like the idea that I can be surprised, and then I can find so much joy. So, and I've said this. Okay, some of my students will prove me wrong. It says like, Chris, you always say that whenever you want to start something, you will meet up with a lot of pain before you get there, but the thing is that the pain is part of the process because you are not there yet, so you have to suffer through it. So you suffer through it, and then eventually, when life gives it to you, the happiness is like 100 times more. So maybe also because I'm manic depressive, so maybe that's why I like the happy and the lows and all that. But yeah, so I think it's also part of what I am, and becoming me also what becoming my art is all, I think it's one and the same journey. Yeah. So yeah, that's a very good question. I never thought of it that way.
Yeah, so maybe perhaps, right, instead of just seeing yourself as a storyteller, maybe you unknowingly take on the persona of the conductor. You know, there's a certain sense of rhythm there, but you know, when there are breaks, and when there are
Yes.
change of tone, you know,
The
that
rhythm
happens as well. So
yeah.
so
Yeah, I mean,
yeah,
you're not the first
maybe-
person to
yeah,
say that
maybe-
my
maybe
works
that's
have rhythm. There's a certain rhythm to it. And yes, I mean, I never realized it until someone pointed it out. And then over time, not many people can get this, but I have had 3 people before you, which means now you're number 4, to tell me about the rhythm and the whole idea of the conductor. Yeah, and it's yeah, you know.
very much. I mean, I would very much say that's the phenomena that you see with the contemporary artists these days. You know, it's they know what they're doing. You know, like, I mean, if you just Google any YouTube videos about contemporary art, you know, the first thing you say, like, a lot of people think and say the contemporary art is a case where it's the kind of encounters in the museum, like, oh, even I can do that, you know, by putting it. But you know, a lot of times they don't understand the process that goes along with why you create those objects or place certain objects. And you know, you were quite deliberate. It's in a way, your presentation and your representation of the Peranakan culture here is not sterile. It's one that is dirty and muddled along the way, you know, to reach in a certain sense of that product. So, you know,
Aliveness.
yeah, and I think the next big question I would say I want to ask is, how do you move on from that? You know, how do you move on, or how do you continue this? Because you know, you could do one here, you can do one there,
Well,
and then it becomes like a broken record, which is obviously clearly not what
so
any
the
artist would
initial
want.
work is meant to be unpacked anyway. So it's just a matter of like whether I want to unpack from here or I will start a whole other series of work on the culture. So I'm actually more famous for my nature series. So this is also a departure from the story I want to talk about. So usually I like to look at plants and say, what are you trying to tell me? Right? And then like my good friends will tell me, says, oh, you know, it's trying to tell your green finger to water them and give them fertilizer. Then, but you know, it's a departure from what I like to do. But it doesn't mean that, which brings to mind. So like when I first started, people always say like you need to focus on the style of doing your photography or subject of your photography. I never agreed with it because I felt that as an artist, I need to explore life. And if life is much vaster than me, then why should I only focus on one thing in life? That makes me much less of an artist. So to be able to do different genres of photography, to be able to attempt interesting, never done before kind of stuff, I mean, that very exciting. And I'm sure life will continue to give me that as I create. And yeah, so I don't think I'll ever be limited in that sense. Sometimes I'll be a bit stuck, you know, then I'll just go to the toilet, major poop, and then I'll probably be okay after that, you know, that kind of stuff. You need to just get it out of the system, and then, yeah, and then something will come. Something will definitely come. Yeah.
I guess the other interpretation here, for me, maybe tend towards the realm of the space itself, or the idea of a space, yeah, or a place, and your whole idea of placemaking here, because you know,
Placemaking.
you know, the of cross dressing and culture, it's one that's intimate, that you are bringing out towards the front, and with
Bring it forward, yeah.
and of the of cups and kueh, in the sense you're bringing the street into a focus. You know, it seems quite deliberate for me that you're not addressing the main thing in the center, where you know, where you are really seeing around, but it's one that you want to tease out the insular or the intimate out, and the
It's
the
related to
external
the
in, yeah.
yeah.
So, you know, explain to me this I would say dichotomy, or the juxtapose between these works?
Wow, very big question, Dave.
Maybe you can skip that question if you.
Okay, someone give me some whiskey. You know? No, but I think it's like everything big is small, everything small is big. Is how the universe works. You know, it's like we are made out of atoms, and then the atoms makes up the whole universe. And I never think about whether my vista is the street or my vista is whatever. So if I'm given a certain space, my purpose is the story first. So like let's dig this out. What do I want to say? Because it's not their story, it's the story I want to hear from them. So so when it comes out, and quite often it would, and because they're such interesting stories and because it's such real lives, it would definitely include the other atoms in their life as well, which then brings it to a bigger thing. So as much as I'm focusing down, I'm also actually focusing at the bigger picture, if that makes sense. And then like in the sense of this also, like how I had to personally become the actor in order to kind of think what the actor is going to do and what the actor will be doing in this. So I'm married with a Japanese wife, and then my daughter is half Chinese, half Japanese, and then we have and she's going to finish her PSLE, and therefore what's she doing? And she gave me this drawing which I put in the mirror. So who am I as a father, and who am I as a husband, and what am I doing? So I have to take on this character, which I love. I mean, like, which is why I like theater, right? So it's kind of like the universe of a fictional character then becomes real to me. It's like a real universe that I have to pick up atom by atom and then place into something that talks about my universe. And then so I think in that sense, which is why I think why people find my works interesting, is when they go into it, they realize that every time they look at it, there's something else. They look at it, there's something else. Look at it, there's something else. It's never ending. And I love that there's more stories that you can come up with than I initially thought, if that's even possible. And that's nice, you know, because, and that's what being open-minded, being creative is about. And I want everyone to also share the joy I have in creating, because creativity really gives joy, like a lot of joy when you're like, wow, I can do this, I can do that, wow, I can do this. Is the idea of enabling yourself to create something, not out of nothing. You know, that's being an artist, that's being creative. Yeah, so if people come and they feel that, yes, I can do this, yeah, I think it's also kind of like spreading the joy. Should I read that out loud?
Yeah, so I mean, over the past few minutes, you were talking about more your personal processes, but at the end of it, you did mention kind of the impact that it may give the audience, or also how the audience may receive your artworks. So yeah, I think that also brings up a question in me about like kind of the role of contemporary art and and how education can play into that. How contemporary art for you, in the case of the Baba House, has kind of opened up the conversation into an otherwise very historicized community to make something more speculative, which I think is very interesting to what we have done, and also, you know, through your upcoming shirt design. Yeah, so yeah, do you have any comments on the
I think in terms of like contemporary art, I think first and foremost, there's always a sense of wanting to do something. Don't think about contemporary, think about art, think about creative, think about what means the most to you. It could be something that nobody cares about and just you care about. And if that's interesting enough to you, you should do that. I think that is what, and then the idea of being educated in art to me is just, not all, is a way of being able to create this factory of artists that's able to produce the kind of work that we see these days. I know I'm going to insult a lot of people here. I don't mean to, but you know, we end up seeing a lot of work that's filled with big words and all that, but the works are themselves a lot smaller because they don't. That you have to read the words, then see the words. Oh wow, it's like that one, you know. Instead of like seeing the word and go like wow, and then when you read the word, it's even more wow, you know. So it's that kind of. I think that's kind of, for me, describing it should never be more important than actually saying it with your work. I think that's, to me, I mean, that's what any art is about. And then if you do it of contemporary issues and all that, or contemporary methods, then yeah, it's good contemporary art. Yeah, I mean, that's how I feel about this whole education thing. And then being able to work in this museum, I mean, I'm very grateful that right from the first work, I was just given a lot of free hand, and then occasionally, you know, curator or someone will come to me, or some researcher will come to me and say, what about this, what about that? Hey, yeah, why didn't I put that in? And then, you know, that adds to my work. And then I think that's very nice. Same for this time around. I'm very grateful to you, right? I mean, like you kind of like, you know, give me certain tips on how to make your message clearer, which I think is important, because then as an audience, you see it a bit more different from me, who's maybe too involved already, and like I'm like kind of a bit stuck. Then you open it up for me, and then like, oh, my world atoms burst, you know, that kind of thing. So I think that's very nice. Yeah, as an environment to be able to, for an artist to be able to, but the artists must themselves want to be excited about the thing they want to create. I think that's more important. Yeah, like I can't stop creating, and yeah, which is why I did this. But we will see why in a bit. Yeah.
Okay, so I think that we'll wrap up this internal conversation that we have right now. And if anyone from the audience would like to ask any questions, we'll now go into the Q&A segment. So we have both the audience on Zoom as well on Facebook. So if you have any questions, please do put them down in the comments, and we'll filter them to us to ask Chris.
Or them.
Yes.
Please them.
So in the meantime, you'll see some of the Q&A tips that we have. Please do let us know if you have any questions, or if you have any comments as well about anything.
Thanks. Don't know yet.
Yeah. All right. So I think we will ask. Some of the questions are more artwork related, so I guess we can begin with those. The question is, I noticed that all the items as part of the artwork are so unique and carefully chosen. I'm assuming this is of cross-dressing and culture. Can you elaborate more on the process of acquiring these various pieces? Did the stories behind these objects contribute to your final artwork, or even change the direction of your narrative? So it's very related to the process.
It's very related. So, let's focus on the makeup first. So when I first focused on the makeup, I was trying to say, okay, so what's there about makeup? You know, and my first approach was our very own famous drag queen. I was like, say, what would you do? You know, and I started to kind of realize that no, that's not the character I want. And then I went to talk to my friends. I have a lot of actor friends, and then so what is it like in terms of makeup? Let's say if you are now the male actor and you need to play a female that's not a drag queen, what would you do? So there was a lot of like conversations with them, and then I was like, okay, what do you use? You know, there's one particular brand of face cleaner that always comes. So I said, okay, I need to include that. So that's in the waste paper basket with a used tissue, which is also sealed up, because museum, it needs to be clean. Yeah. And then the idea of like wearing the bigger contact lenses to make your iris bigger also, I thought, oh, that's actually very interesting. So these conversations kind of enable me to kind of look at this. And it's very interesting because whenever I talk to them about this, then I will have said, oh, you use finish already, give to me. You use finish, you give to me. So there's a lot of all this stuff. And then I went online. There's this arts giveaway thingy that people who want to get rid of their stuff, and then some of them will give out makeup, and I say, okay, give me the whole bag, and then I'll come home and I'll start to kind of examine what this is, and also kind of analyze the person who gave it to me. And so I say, okay, why did this person use so many masks, and then why did this mask all from Korea, and then like so much this, she goes to Bangkok very often because there's a lot from boots and so on and so forth. And then I'm going to say, okay, so this could be part of the character also. I need to internalize this and say, I will choose this. So at the same time also, I want to be able to make this very present as a Singaporean. So as a Singaporean, this is other kind of stuff that they use. So through all the interviews that I did, I kind of said, okay, so there's a lot of Korean stuff. Then the Australian stuff is like for the people who are more conscious of the skin conditions and stuff like that. So there's also a bit of that, there's a bit of that. And I also wanted it to be male and female, right? So there's a male dandruff thingy. And then there's also the female, the eyelashes thingy, which was a bit longer than usual because being a male, you don't know, and all you see is long eyelashes. And you don't think that the shorter ones are real. Or are real, then so on and so forth. So it's kind of like this, I'm having, as the person who plays the actor, who plays the character, I then become the actor and then say like this conversation. So, hey, actor, so you want this or not? You want this or not? And then say, okay, put this in. And then think about the audience who's going to see this. How is this going to work? And then therefore those are then, because I had like a lot, like 100 pieces, right? It came down to less than 20. You know, eventually it was like, and then I put it down there, and then like to even do the smear and all that. It's interesting because the idea of how in a museum all artifacts are like pristine, they have to be, you know, cleaned up and all that. And then now you have this thing that kind of like looks a bit dirty, but yet, you know, it has to be kind of sterile. And then to choose that and then to put them in, and then eventually become a piece of artwork. Yeah.
I like the element of how you bring in, you know, the opinions or like the objects of many different people. And it reminds me, I mean, it seems like a running thread even from the 5 portraits that you made in the past, because for that you interviewed all these various people, then you brought them all together in a single space so that you can like draw that parallel in the same way to this installation as well.
Yes, yeah. So yeah, it's always about how do I keep it real, even though it's a character playing a character. Yeah. Any other questions?
So I think then the next question, which could potentially be related to the first one, is what are some of the challenges that you faced in portraying Peranakan culture in general with the many multiplicities of narratives? I mean, as we've seen in the types of makeup, I mean, not necessarily within Peranakan culture, but the various narratives that happen, that form the culture in the first place. Did you expect resistance?
I think in general, people still think of the Peranakan culture as something that is just antiquated, you know, it's just antique. It's not something that can go into the future because it's never been done. No one can know what it will look like, and therefore it's unfamiliar, and people are usually not very open to unfamiliar things. So 12 years ago, I had 2 very old and established Peranakans come and tell me that they hated my work because I basically wanted to pick up what this thing is and say, look, we need to look into the future and create something. But I was okay. I mean, like, you know, it's granted. I mean, their reaction was granted to me, and I'm okay. This is what I need to hear also. So that's your story, and you will inform me. Maybe in my future work, that's what I will use as my material to talk about resistance. Maybe, I don't know. You know, so I think everything is precious, good or bad. It's yeah.
You know, I mean, I'm not helping Chris to answer this question as well, but I think
Why not? You should.
It's interesting, especially after hearing the process, right? It's his process of making a decision to choose what to put on. You know, it's out of practical need, but you know, there again, you know, with regards to the way we are unpacking, there are layers to certain cues, right? So he does do certain visual cues. It may not be what you expect, but it is there. I mean, with regards to the sarung, you know, the sarung, it could be of Peranakan influence, but it could also be of, you know, the Nusantara influence as well, and that's fine too, because you know, if you're thinking about Peranakan culture, when we talk about the sarung kebaya or the kain batik itself, right? They're famous for the phoenix motif, the pagi sore, and everything. But what if you can't afford that, and you want to still be able to do it? And a lot of times, the sarung kebaya has been modified and being used, with different garments with different motifs as well. For example, the megah mendung. I'm pretty sure Chris will elaborate a little bit further. But that's the key thing. As an artist, right? When you stage the production or when you stage the artwork itself, it's not while people like make the end product that you want to come up with, is there are various effects to get the psyche of the audience excited. One is of course to shock, one is of course to familiarity. But I think even within familiarity, what Chris has done is relatability. So the 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 items itself may not be Peranakan, and that's possibly why there might be certain resistance for certain sections of the audience. But once they slowly unpack the work itself and things become relatable, then um, I think that's when the culture comes alive. And even right down to the mirror, I did ask Chris like why do you keep drawings of spiders and everything? Then he was saying those are the anamorphic motifs of those are the anamorphic motifs of the symbols that people often associate with the Chinese culture or even the Peranakan culture. But the use of the drawing rather than intricates, I guess the trinkets and the glass beads, right? Then becomes the element of relatability, and I guess that takes the skill of the artist. That's the value add of the artist to the artwork rather than setting up practical stuff and also bringing out the nostalgic or the antiquities of the culture itself. And then the whole idea of it being a living culture becomes that point of debate, and that will be the point of that will be the entry point for resistance, but that will be the entry point of acceptance as well. So, I think we do need to discuss the idea of relatability here.
You're a bit soft. You need to speak louder.
Necessarily something that is super explicit for the audience to understand, but the fact that they have to come to their own conclusions via that relatability will also then help to help them understand as well.
Get into the stories and then eventually understand what the whole expense of the culture is about. And maybe come up with their own then yay, right?
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Okay, there's another question. Hi Chris, thank you for the talk. I was wondering if you could share more about your conversations with Chun and how it came to influence the final presentation of Cups and Kueh.
Sorry, what
the conversations that you had with Chun and how did these conversations influence the final presentation of the work?
So actually the work was photographed. I think I did in total, I think I did 10, then 6 was chosen. So I think I did 2 pictures, and I decided to bring a friend in to become the client or the advisor, and then to have that conversation and then to talk. And then as I'm interviewing him, we will change location, and then they would have a conversation. And then we have a client also who came in and then bought something while we were in the process of doing it. So the whole thing kind of like, it's not what he told me that informed me what I wanted to shoot. It was kind of like as he was doing that, something happened. As we were moving direction, then something happened over there. It's almost like, again, it's serendipity. So it's as if like life is telling you, move your camera there, face there, and then just start a conversation and see what happens, And then my placement is always to have the 2 of them, sometimes in reflection, sometimes in whatever. But the 2 important things is the cup of tea and the kueh on the plate. So it's because the idea is about the objects and then the things that binds the relationship, right? Over tea and over kuehs, which is why I like food so much, I guess, because it's a relationship lubricant, I guess, so that you talk more and then you say, oh, this is nice, and you start a conversation. Yeah, so I think, does that answer the question? Kind of, right? Did it?
I think, yeah, it did. But perhaps like what kind of like particularities, if any, did you talk about with Cattoni?
Oh, so like for example, like when he talked about how there was this very famous person who studied Peranakan culture and who is very definitive when it comes to what is expensive and what is good and all that, and then they happen to be friends, and like how he was teaching him how to value this is how much, and what is this called, and why is this part of the Peranakan culture, and then which household is getting rid of all their furniture and stuff, which one you should, when you go there, you must know what you're looking for so that you get the most valuable stuff, So because a lot of people, they throw away stuff or they sell away their things when they move overseas, like their wares, their cups, whatever it is. And then how you wouldn't know what, when he first started, like what to collect. And then he's got this friend who's a massive scholar of Peranakan stuff, I guess, because he publishes books as well, who informs him and teaches him and all that. So that came out in that conversation, and then it's like, that's when you have this, like my friend acting as someone who knows something and then telling him. So the hand gesture is a very different kind of hand gesture, as opposed to the other one where it's an exchange of cash. It's kind of like a fast movement, like this is how much, and it moves on. Yeah.
Thank you. We have one more question from the Facebook. So as you look to the future, do you think Peranakan culture can represent a kind of multiculturality that resonates beyond Southeast Asia? Can it be a kind of avant-garde for where many societies are going?
Yes.
Yeah. So
Yeah, that's it.
yes.
Yes, and yes.
Okay, so
Definitely
thank you,
yes.
Facebook.
I think actually I think that's why. Oh, I shouldn't put the government into this, but I think that's why the government wants to like promote this so-called Peranakan thing, because I think they see in it the whole, how everyone comes together and become friends, and then it becomes like a whole melting pot of cultures and all that. Yeah, I think, I mean, like, yeah, I'm being positive here, but maybe that's why. Yes, and then yes, and yes, for sure. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, in case you're watching me on Facebook.
I mean to answer that as well, and taking into consideration, in terms of avant-gardism, I think it's something that when we discuss culture, it's we talk again, we talk about the hybridity and all that, and that is basically the main focal points that people always want to tease out with regards to the Peranakan culture as well. But I think what the works, and also when we talk about culture itself, it's the recognition, like what Chris mentioned, it's a living culture, and as much as it is like a language where it's constantly changing, it's something that, again, the idea of celebration and veneration here. So when we think about that, we should also think inwardly towards us as well, like us as a person, like thriving in a culture, and it may not even be to one particular culture. Like I may be Malay, in terms of my ancestors and all that, but I may also be absorbing certain polities that I've encountered with. Like for example, if I were to be in South Thailand, I live and breathe that culture as well. And I think the veneration and the avant-gardism is through this intercommunication that we may say that it's one of the first few idea of cosmopolitanism being like extrinsically teased out or spoken out, when we talk about the Peranakan culture of the past, and maybe that's that modus operandi can be the way moving forward, and I think it's applicable to most of the other cultures as well. And I guess when we talk about modes of transmissions of of all this information and knowledge, and I think that's how we should treat culture as, as that modes of transmission towards something new. Us living here might be, the way of life that we are living here, especially maybe during the pandemic, might be setting certain precedents 30 or 50, 40 years in the past. We may never know. And again, just going back to what Chris has been always discussing, the idea of the living. So yeah, I think that's how we should treat it, rather than treating it as a form of avant-gardism,
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so one more question is, hi, Chris and Hilmi, how do you see your art and contemporary art as an educational resource in studying the Peranakan culture or other cultures that have long-standing stereotypes, specifically like cultures that people may have static ideas about? So I think it might be vaguely related to the question earlier on.
Education, right?
Yeah, about education. And I think
Well, you never censor one.
looking at it's looking at, I think, more of the stereotypical part of it. Like, how do we then use it to look at?
I think we need to.
Can I say this first? Yeah.
Can.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe. I mean.
Thank you for saying it first.
Yeah. For I guess on a light-hearted note, collaborate with NUS Museum. I mean, it is true because
academia,
and I'm leading on to the next reason why so. I explain my experience when I put up the off place and the paradox, and when that presentation was first discussed, right? It was to talk about my thesis. But it evolved so much to the point that instead of talking about thesis, we are talking about an entire ecosystem that was going to be built or was building in front of our eyes, and I put that I guess homage to the way the curatorial practice is being practiced here at the NUS Museum, and it's okay to fail, but you still have to present something great, and I think the threshold of failure allows us to make that constant movement and constant improvements towards the practice.
Yes.
You
evolve through failures, yeah.
And I think that's what Chris ensures as well. And when in addressing the stereotype as well, it's when Chris talked to me and invited me together with NUS Museum, invited me to be an interlocutor here. I told him, Chris, I don't know much about Peranakan culture, and how illustrious. I know how the illustrious Peranakan scholars are. It's. I would admit that was a field that I was very afraid to enter. But then when Chris described to me the artwork and talked to me about it, and I realized that it's a work in progress. It's constantly a work in progress, and I think that acknowledgement that it's a work in progress allows us to move forward and push certain boundaries. Yeah, we will face setbacks and we will face resistance for sure, but I think the idea of pushing the boundaries and constantly trying to find the limits, and I would say constantly here, because it's again the whole idea of the WIP, right? Constantly pushing that limits then allow us to realize what certain subjects in the contemporary world, as well as the living cultures truly entail. And
I think that goes into everyday lives as well, especially for our young children, right? The idea of failure, like failure is where we evolve lah. Success is, that means you repeat whatever has been successful before. So it's always that idea that you can't fail, which is, I don't believe in it. Yes, I mean, like in photography as well, like when I first started, everyone was talking about, wow, which aperture, which camera you must get, and then what film has the best color, blah, 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 blah. But at the end of it, yes, it informed me and made me who I am today. When I do my photography, it's like, I want an American color, I want a European color, I want a Japanese color. I'm able to recreate that because I've lived through that and being able to recreate that. So I'm not against what is set in stone, because that is set in stone and that's history. But what I'm against is that then your legs are kind of cemented into that stone. Then I don't agree with that. You need to say, okay, so that's the past, we agree, that's 100 years ago. 100 years later, what do we see that we can do to bring this forward? Because there's only so much antiques we can collect, and there's only so much 100-year-old things that we can value and outsell, right? But when you create new things, that's when you get excited about life again. It's not about, life is not about what you can buy with your money in that material thing, but rather what you can experience. Yeah, which can also include, of course, obviously expensive stuff, but it doesn't always have to be. Yeah.
Okay, so I think that's a very good kind of like way to move on to the final question. So yeah, you're talking about process and versus the product, perhaps. So in the earlier stages of conceptualizing this program with you and Hilmi, we spoke a bit about your intention to place the shirt that you've designed and are currently wearing by the floor of the dressing table at the end of this evening's talk to round off the work. So this is kind of indeed related to looking at the process. So how then would you know if a piece is finished? Especially in the case of installation art, what we've been talking about throughout the whole conversation, of cross-dressing and culture, where tweaks are made over a period of time and balancing that element of both the spatial and the temporal. So yeah, how do you think of this idea of like finishing an artwork?
Okay, because I'm very process based, and if the process is really exciting and it's really like invigorates me, right? I don't ever feel I want to stop the process. So even though the budget is used up, it's already paid to me, I'm still creating stuff, because like when I want to create, I want to create. You cannot say, oh, you don't have money anymore. That is not my vocab. My vocab is like, I got this, I think it's great, I'm going to do it. So like, I always wanted to do something going forward. Like, my phrase is future Peranakan. Like, what would people of today, younger generation, not even my generation, younger generation, what would they want to wear? So I know they like to wear oversized t-shirts. And then I said, okay, let's bring something from the past, right? So the manga Mega Mengu, which is the icons of clouds on batik, right? They draw the clouds on batik and all that. So I took out that motif, and I wanted to change that, perhaps in the way the clouds are drawn and all that. And then I decided to print iron on and create this kind of this pattern. And because I will continue to create, and I will keep wanting to place things in this artwork. Yeah, someone was complaining just now, why you got one more thing? So, so I decided to give myself a physical thing, which is I said, this is the last piece of work I'm going to do for this artwork. And I'm going to take off this shirt. Okay, I want to make it to like a performance. I'm going to take off this shirt, and then I'm going to put it right next to the artwork, and therefore it becomes a part of the artwork. Yeah, the interpretation I'll leave to the audience. So yes, I will do that after this talk.
Okay, so that brings us to the end of this grounded conversations today. Thank you so much for joining us this evening, audience, as well as to definitely Chris and Hilmi for being part of this conversation. Both
and the audience for being here.
Look into the themes that we have today.
Yes.
So with Chris about to add a closing touch to this artwork, we will show the feedback form through the QR code provided at the end of this talk. But other than that, that is all from us. So thank you and have a good evening ahead.